Welcome back to our Nurau Talks, where we talk on Fridays at noon about all topics related to mental health at the workplace. And today I'm so honored to be having Dr. Laura Giurge with us today, who's going to be talking about time, well-being, and work. So welcome, Laura.
Hi. Well, I'm really excited to be here.
So Laura, I'm just going to read a short bio here. She's an award-winning organizational scholar and behavioral scientist. And right now she's an assistant professor at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Dr. Giurge holds a Ph.D. in management from Erasmus University's Rotterdam School of Management and has been a postdoctoral research fellow at Cornell University and London Business School. In 2019 and 2020, she was a visiting scholar at Harvard Business School. Her research focuses on time, well-being, and the future of work, and she has been published in top academic journals such as Nature Human Behavior and in leading media outlets such as the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and Harvard Business Review. So we're so glad to have you here, Laura. And I was thinking a bit about the relationship between what we do here at Nurau and your work. And I think oftentimes when we think about mental health at work, one key component that we neglect is the lack of time, because we think we either don't have time to take care of our mental well-being with all the other work we have to do, or actually it's the very feeling of being rushed that's actually impacting our well-being. And so I love that your research is all about bringing awareness to this concept of time scarcity. And I wanted to kind of start off with that. So would you mind defining what time scarcity is and what we currently know in scientific literature about how time scarcity affects our well-being?
Yeah, so that is a really important topic, and it's one of the reasons why I got interested in this, is that we're seeing this growing phenomenon across the world, not just developing countries, but actually, developing countries as well. So really briefly, time scarcity means the chronic experience of not having enough time to do, anything that we want or have to do. And I want to emphasize on one element of this definition, which is that it's about the subjective experience of time, meaning that it's not so much about how many hours we spend on different activities, but how we feel about those hours in particular. And, we can get into the factors of what actually drives the time scarcity experience. But to your question, time scarcity is problematic because it has been linked to a lot of negative outcomes across all aspects of our life. The most documented effects are actually on our personal life. So time scarcity has been linked to depression, stress, anxiety, lower likelihood to exercise, and just lower subjective well-being, meaning lower happiness. Time scarcity also affects our health. As you can imagine, it can lead to insomnia, obesity, high blood pressure, and high fatigue. And not surprisingly, this time scarcity also affects our social life. So people who feel short on time or they feel time poor are more likely to have poor social relationships, to get divorced, and actually fail to help someone in need. Now, at work, time scarcity is also a big factor because it leads us to engage in behaviors that ironically make us feel more time poor, such as multitasking or overcommitted to things that we don't have time for, and speeding up our pace of work.
Wow, that's a lot of consequences of time scarcity. And I think we all intuitively resonate with that feeling of always not having enough time. And I think the advent of technology has just made it that we feel that even more. And I was curious to know what the various factors, I know there are many different factors that contribute to time scarcity and it kind of getting worse with our society. So could you kind of go over the various factors, both maybe internally, psychologically, but also the more broader societal, institutional factors that contribute to it?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. There's a lot of factors, and I think would need a lot more time to delve into all of them. So I'll kind of highlight some of the ones that I think are really resonating perhaps with a lot of people. So from a societal perspective, there are changes to the social structures that shape time. Those changes have accelerated the speed of life. So for instance, family structures are no longer stable and careers are no longer passed down from generation to generation. As one statistics, people on average today change jobs about 11 times across their entire career. There's also, of course, as you alluded to, the internet and the modern technologies such as mobile phones, email, and so forth that provide us to access to an infinite number of experiences and the opportunity to live a sort of a multiplicity of lives within a single lifetime. And this increased choice and opportunity leads us to feel like we're missing out. And as a result, we feel time poor and really unhappy because of that. At work, one of the key drivers of time scarcity is this increased fragmentation of time caused by all kinds of unnecessary meetings and social obligations. So one study showed that employees tend to have their day fragmented by 88 different episodes of 10 minutes or less. And this interruption can increase our feelings of time scarcity because it undermines our sense of control over our day. And these interruptions are also undermining our productivity because of what it's called attentional residue, which is this idea of our attention carries over from the previous task, and it takes some time to move from one task to the other. So even if we think we're just going to look 5 seconds at our email, those 5 seconds really interrupt our attention and make us feel like we're behind schedule all the time. There's also really fascinating institutional factors, such as long commute times because of poor infrastructure, or paperwork burdens, such as the need to stay in line and fill out really convoluted forms to get really necessary paperwork done, such as, healthcare benefits or tax deduction and so forth. And finally, I think, some of the most fascinating ones are the psychological ones, I think. And one of my favorites is this belief that we have more time in the future than we do today. And this leads us to say yes to more things in the future, to overcommit to things, because we think we're going to be less busy a week from today than we are today. But obviously, the day will have 24 hours next Friday as it does today. So there's also another one, which is kind of undervaluing time as opposed to money. And that leads us to pursue careers and jobs that gives us more money but less time, when there's so much research showing that having time off with friends and family is one of the most beneficial things we can do for our well-being.
Wow, that's so fascinating. I'm even thinking now about the way that I think about time and the future. That's so interesting. I was curious also, how do these, especially the psychological ones, and maybe this affects society as well, but how do demographic differences, so thinking about gender or even socioeconomic status, how do these factors influence the way that we experience time scarcity?
Yeah, so obviously, I think different groups experience time scarcity in different ways. And I think one interesting group to talk about is low versus high income individuals. They both can experience time scarcity, but for different reasons and to different degrees. So let's take, for example, the low income individuals' experience of time scarcity. It derives from working or having to work multiple jobs and having unpredictable schedules that makes it very difficult for them to, manage and plan both work and non-work responsibilities. Now, on the other spectrum of high income workers, they might have more control over when and where they work because they're in, higher paid jobs and higher status. But they still experience time scarcity because of the ideal worker norm of overtime and instant responsiveness to work. So they can't really disconnect. They feel like they always have to be on. However, at the end of the day, the differences between low and high income individuals is that, high income individuals in theory could pay for childcare and take vacation, while low income individuals often do not have such options. Now, you've already alluded a little bit to this, but another interesting group is working parents, and in particular, working mothers. And this is not surprising, perhaps, seeing that there's so much research and hopefully more awareness of the fact that the burden of non-work responsibilities such as childcare and household chores tend to fall primarily on women. This phenomenon has kind of become known as this double shift phenomenon, and it can have really negative effects on women's well-being and health because it just decreases their leisure time, both in terms of the time that they have to spend on activities that are beneficial for their well-being, but also when they engage in those activities, they tend to be fragmented by all these different non-work responsibilities when they're at home.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because actually the LinkedIn Live before this and the one before that, we looked at pregnancy and how that impacts women's experience in the workplace, and also miscarriage and how we don't really talk about that, but it's like managers don't know how to deal with that kind of grief. And so I love how there's more research in the field about women and their specific lived experiences, I think, at the workplace. And I think especially COVID too. I know there was a paper that you published about COVID and how that affected, especially women and their experiences at home, trying to balance home and work. Maybe could you talk a bit about that research paper?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the differences, these gender differences in time scarcity, I think are profound. And one of the reasons for doing that research was that we were arguing during COVID, we should have seen more equal distribution of tasks at home, because in most cases, both parents or both spouses or both partners were at home. So they could kind of equally allocate those tasks. Yet in data collected with from over 3,000 working adults across the world, across countries, we found that women, and especially working mothers, ended up doing more of the household chores, and this negatively affected their well-being.
Mm-hmm.
So we would have expected an equal distribution, but sadly, we found the opposite. So we didn't really want to find that, but that's what the data showed.
Yeah, right. And I think that's very important for managers to know, especially with this data coming out, is how, and I think we're still doing a lot of remote work. I know after the pandemic, that remote work has really increased. And so we still have a lot of moms that are working from home. And so I think it's important with this research showing that women are disproportionately affected. I think that's an important statistic, I think, for managers to keep in mind. And with that, I think, here we have both managers and employees who are listening in. I was wondering if you could talk a bit to both sides. So for both managers and employees, what would they do with your research regarding time scarcity? How can they, for managers, help their employees with this phenomenon? But then as an employee yourself, like, what can we do? How can we implement this research?
I mean, there's so many things. I'm going to try to be super brief, but I think starting from the manager's perspective, which I think, as managers, they have the power to change culture. They have the power to change trends at work. So for managers, they need to just change how they think about productivity and collaboration, because especially in knowledge work in particular, more hours work doesn't necessarily equal better performance. But managers seem to have a hard time letting go of old metrics of performance, such as face time and overtime, or even, number of hours worked, because those metrics are very clear and straightforward. But this failure to adapt and focus on quality rather than quantity means more and more difficulty in attracting and retaining talent. So one solution for managers is to clearly communicate goals, but allow employees to decide how to achieve those goals. And then on the flip side, I think for employees, it's this research that's coming out on time scarcity coupled with the experience of COVID is kind of already leading some employees to reconsider and reevaluate their relationship with work and demanding better conditions from work, as they should, such that they can engage in their non-work activities and that matter to them, right? So I think this is a great trend, and hopefully it will continue. Since we know from decades of research that taking time off is important, not just for our well-being, but also for our productivity at work. I think the next challenge at work is learning how to say no to things that we want to do, and not only to things that we have to do, since the list of available opportunities is just infinite. So focus will become, I think, key, and learning to prioritize the tasks that truly matter at work, the big rocks, will likely be an inevitable skill that we all need to learn.
Very well said, Laura. I love that you said, we need a paradigm shift, that we're not just talking about more hours is better, but really talking about the big rocks and what is most important. And I think that really is well-being, I think, of employees is one of those big rocks that we need to be prioritizing. Yeah. So is there any last word that you'd like to leave us with? Maybe to encourage us as we are maybe feeling, this 15 minutes, it's time scarce. Is there anything you would like to leave listeners with?
I think one of the things that I think is really important is, if you don't ask, you don't get. And I think we tend to think that others will judge us harsher than we think they will. So we just need to get better at communicating what we need and what we want with our managers, with our teams, so that we can get on the same page, as opposed to assuming that others just know what we want and what we need.
I love that. Yeah, being able to really communicate what we want. I think that's a good note for us to end on. Well, thank you, Laura. It has been 15 minutes, and thank you for being so concise and summarizing very deep concepts for us. And I wish you all a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you back for our next Nurau Talk. So thank you again, Laura. It was wonderful having you.
Thank you so much. Bye.